Have you ever considered that the act you've performed for decades, something automatic, familiar, almost instinctual, might be both silently supporting your well-being and, depending on how it's approached, potentially causing harm? Masturbation in older age remains one of the least discussed yet most deeply personal parts of the aging experience, especially for men past their 60s. It's a topic that many avoid out of discomfort. Yet it holds keys not just to understanding sexual vitality, but to unlocking broader insights about aging health and emotional balance. In today's video, we're stepping beyond superficial advice and taboos to explore what truly happens when men continue to engage in self-pleasure into their 60s, 70s, and beyond. This is a journey into real science, examining the prostate hormonal changes, emotional regulation, and even physical recovery. We'll shine a light on what these habits mean, not just biologically, but psychologically, and how they evolve with age. We'll also touch on an important distinction when this act shifts from mindful self-care to something more unconscious, and how that shift can affect both body and spirit. As a medical professional who has spent decades researching the aging male body, emotionally, neurologically, and physiologically, I can tell you with certainty your routines matter, and they evolve alongside you in this video. You'll find evidence-backed insights, real patient experiences, and actionable practices you can apply. Right now, this isn't about shame, confusion, or avoidance. It's about clarity, dignity, and truth. Before we dive in, I'd love to know who's here. If you're ready to take something meaningful from today's discussion, leave a comment with the number 1 below. It tells me you're tuned in and engaged. And if you value content like this, consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. If you know someone who would benefit from these insights, share the video with them too. Now let's dive into this journey of self-awareness and health. Let's begin with how the body transforms and how your relationship with pleasure can adapt right along with it. After Harold began to accept the shifts in his physical sensations, another deeper question began to surface in his mind, one that many older men never voice out loud. Could this long-held private act he had continued over the years be doing more for him than just offering fleeting pleasure? He thought back to specific moments like the nights he'd fallen asleep more easily after an orgasm, or those mornings where his thoughts felt clearer, his emotions more stable at the time he'd brushed them off as coincidence. But now he was beginning to realize they might have been signs of something greater. Masturbation, especially when approached with intention and awareness, provides measurable benefits both physically and emotionally. It's not simply a residual habit from youth. In fact, it can become a crucial tool for maintaining health. Particularly as men grow older, one of the first and most important physical benefits is the way it promotes blood circulation to the pelvic area. When blood flow is stimulated regularly, the tissues of the penis remain oxygenated, flexible, and responsive. This routine movement helps preserve erectile strength and sensitivity, acting almost like a tune-up for the sexual system for men who struggle with conditions like erectile dysfunction or loss of libido. Self-pleasure can serve as a form of maintenance, supporting function that might otherwise decline faster with age. There's also the impact of orgasm on the nervous and hormonal systems every time an orgasm is experienced. Whether alone or with a partner, the body releases a flood of neurochemicals like endorphins and oxytocin. These compounds are nature's mood stabilizers. They reduce anxiety, lift depressive symptoms, and even counteract the effects of chronic stress. And stress, as many aging men know, is often magnified by loss grief or loneliness that comes in later years. Masturbation for men like Harold became more than just physical. It became a therapeutic reset button, a personal ritual that brought grounding and calm in an otherwise unpredictable body. Even more compelling is the benefit to prostate health. Scientific studies have shown that regular ejaculation may help reduce the risk of prostate cancer by keeping the system flushed and free from cellular buildup. It lowers inflammation and helps reduce stagnation in the prostate ducts. While it's not a standalone cure, it's an important piece of a broader approach to prostate care, one that's natural, accessible, and effective. And finally, there's the emotional reconnection it fosters as bodies change and sexual responses evolve. Many men grow detached from their sense of sensuality. Masturbation can offer a private space to relearn those pathways, to explore what still brings joy, and to rediscover the quiet power of simply being present in your own body. For Harold, this act became a daily affirmation that aging hadn't taken his sensuality away. It had simply changed how he accessed it. But Harold's journey didn't remain in perfect balance. Like so many others, he found himself drifting subtly, almost imperceptibly from intention to overuse, after rediscovering the grounding healing benefits of self-pleasure. He began turning to it more frequently some days. It was just once. Other days it became a default response to loneliness, to sleeplessness, to emotional discomfort. At first it was comforting, a private act of self-soothing, but over time it became automatic. And that's when the early warning signs began to show. He began feeling tired more often, not just after masturbating, but in general. His energy waned throughout the day. He felt less inclined to connect with others, choosing solitude over social outings. His emotional availability during phone calls with his children diminished, and oddly enough, the very satisfaction he once felt began to feel harder to reach. It took more time, more effort, and more intensity to achieve the same release. Masturbation had stopped being a healing ritual, and instead became a numbing routine, something he reached for not out of connection, but out of habit. This is a pattern I've seen in many older men. When self-pleasure shifts from conscious care to unconscious compulsion, it creates unintended effects that ripple throughout one's life. Physically, excessive stimulation can desensitize the very nerve endings that give us pleasure. It can wear down the pelvic muscles, creating tension and fatigue that lingers. It may even disrupt sleep, especially if the habit is used as a late-night coping tool, pulling the nervous system into arousal when it should be preparing for rest emotionally. It fosters dependency when masturbation replaces emotional expression, relational intimacy, or even just quiet reflection. It becomes a crutch. It can reinforce feelings of isolation, heighten anxiety, and create a private cycle of shame. The brain's reward pathways, especially as we age, become sensitive to patterns, and when pleasure is tied to instant gratification, it becomes harder to enjoy slower, more meaningful forms of intimacy, like long conversations, cuddling, or being held. But let me be very clear, this isn't about labeling the behavior as bad. It's about understanding your why. If masturbation is being used for connection, presence, or release, it can be supportive if it's become a way to avoid loneliness, stress, or emotional discomfort. It may be time to pause and reassess. There's no one-size-fits-all frequency for healthy self-pleasure. In older age, the line between nourishment and compulsion is deeply personal in this section. We'll examine the neuroscience behind overuse, how dopamine systems change in the aging brain, how compulsive behavior forms, and what emotional patterns indicate imbalance. We'll also walk with Harold through the small, mindful steps he took to realign himself with intention, and how he reclaimed this act, not as an escape, but as a meaningful piece of a richer, more emotionally grounded life. When Harold came to terms with how his once mindful habit had veered into something compulsive, he didn't shame himself or retreat into guilt. Instead, he paused. He stepped back, not in judgment, but in curiosity, and asked himself one powerful question: what do I actually need right now? That question didn't always lead to the same answer. Some days he realized he simply needed rest. Other times, it meant reaching out to someone he trusted, And yes, there were still times when self-intimacy was what he needed, but now it came with clarity and choice, not impulse. This shift became the beginning of something more profound. Harold began rebuilding a relationship with his own pleasure, not as a reaction to discomfort, but as a deliberate, meaningful ritual. It was no longer about distraction or avoidance. It was about tuning in, about nurturing himself, and about staying honest with what felt nourishing. He recognized that pleasure, when practiced with care, had the power to restore him, but when used unconsciously, it could quietly drain him. The truth is, there is no magic number when it comes to how often one should masturbate. In later years, there's no universal formula or ideal schedule. What really matters is the effect it has on your body, your energy, your emotions, and your relationships. Healthy pleasure feels replenishing it, leaves you feeling grounded, content, and more connected to life. Unhealthy patterns tend to isolate, exhaust, or distract. The key is noticing which one you're engaging in. Harold took simple but powerful steps to bring his habit back into balance. He chose specific nights, once or twice a week, to make it intentional. He created a peaceful environment. No background TV, no scrolling on his phone. He breathed slowly, relaxed fully, and gave his body time. He let his experience unfold rather than rush to a result. And outside the bedroom, he made new efforts to re-engage with life. He joined a walking group at the park. He signed up for a painting class at the local senior centre. And perhaps most importantly, he began having open conversations with other men his age. Conversations that had never happened before, where he learned that his journey was shared by many. This section offers tools for doing exactly what Harold did. Cultivating a healthy, intentional relationship with pleasure. We'll explore how to introduce breathwork into your practice to deepen sensation, how to incorporate non-sexual touch into daily life to stay connected to your body, and how to regularly reflect on your patterns to assess whether your relationship with pleasure is grounded in balance or tipping into habit. Because in the end, this isn't just about pleasure, it's about presence, when you return to your body with gentleness and awareness. Aging stops feeling like a slow decline and begins to feel like a deepening relationship with yourself. For Harold, everything truly changed when he stepped beyond technique and timing and into something even more powerful, forgiveness. Not because he had done something wrong, but because he had spent decades of his life quietly carrying shame, silence, and uncertainty about something that was at its core natural and human. He realized at last that aging hadn't stolen his value or his sensuality. It had simply invited him into a new way of experiencing them. This is where many older men find themselves at the edge of change, but burdened by a lifetime of unspoken rules. Rules that taught them pleasure was private, shameful or only acceptable under certain conditions. Culture often reinforces these silent messages. Society doesn't offer much space for a 70-year-old man to talk openly about his sexuality, unless it's as the punchline of a joke. But your body doesn't operate by those rules. Your needs don't expire, and your right to experience connection, touch, intimacy, and pleasure doesn't disappear with age. It transforms. This final section is about coming home to yourself, about reclaiming your right to self-compassion. Because when you begin to see masturbation not as a habit that needs to be hidden or judged, but as a gateway to presence, health, and wholeness, you begin to rewrite the entire narrative of aging. You learn that what matters isn't how others view your body, it's how you relate to it. You learn that every act of care, every moment of honest connection with yourself helps rebuild something stronger than virility. It builds self-trust. We'll explore simple practices to deepen this self-compassion, like journaling after a self-pleasure session to understand your emotional state, or using affirmations that center your worthiness. No matter your performance, will also provide guidance on how to start conversations with your partner, with your doctor, or even with yourself. So you're not navigating this journey in silence. You'll learn that you don't need to have all the answers. You just need the courage to stay curious and the willingness to let go of the shame that never belonged to you in the first place. For Harold, the greatest victory wasn't in fixing something. It was in learning to meet his changing body with grace and to treat his evolving pleasure not as a source of embarrassment, but as a sacred opportunity for self-love. You deserve nothing less. As Harold moved deeper into his journey of self-awareness, he began to sense a new kind of shift. Subtle at first, but growing more apparent with time. Although he had rebalanced his habit after a period of overuse, there had been a stretch of weeks when masturbation became less about presence and more about escape. What was once a soothing, nourishing ritual had begun to feel mechanical. He noticed that his arousal didn't rise as quickly. His climax felt duller, and the emotional lift that used to follow had faded into something more like fatigue. This led him to explore the concept of overstimulation, an idea not often discussed but deeply relevant for men in later life. When the body is frequently subjected to intense or repetitive sexual stimulation, especially when combined with visual or mental habits, like excessive porn use or compulsive fantasy, the nervous system adapts the result. Pleasure receptors can become less responsive, and natural arousal more difficult to access. The body, in its effort to protect itself from overload, becomes numb to what used to bring joy, but it's not just the physical response that's dulled emotionally. Harold found that overstimulation blurred the line between need and habit. He'd often turn to masturbation, not because of desire, but because it had become routine, something to fill time, manage boredom, or avoid uncomfortable feelings. This created a cycle of dependence. The more he did it, the less effective it became, and the more disconnected he felt afterward. The once soothing release now left him feeling drained, emotionally flat, and sometimes even frustrated. This realization brought with it an invitation to slow down. Harold learned that less could be. More that space between moments of pleasure allowed his body to recover his desire to build naturally and his emotions to settle. He began intentionally spacing out his sessions, giving his mind and body time to reset. He replaced evening habits that triggered compulsive urges like aimless late-night scrolling with calming rituals like reading music or gentle stretches. The difference was immediate when he did return to self-pleasure. It felt meaningful again, charged with emotion and sensation. In this section, we'll explore what the research says about neural overstimulation, how it impacts aging brains differently, and how dopamine pathways can become desensitized. You'll learn the warning signs of overstimulation, like dull climax, increased frequency without satisfaction, and emotional numbness, and how to reset your nervous system. We'll offer strategies such as sensory detox, mindful edging, and integrating breathwork to reawaken sensitivity, because sometimes the key to better pleasure isn't adding more. It's clearing space for what matters. For Harold, one of the most unexpected revelations came when he decided to relearn the language of touch, after realizing how much of his self-pleasure had been focused on outcome, on achieving climax. As quickly as possible, he wondered what would happen if he let go of the destination entirely. Could he find meaning in the journey alone? Could he let his hands become a tool of curiosity rather than control? He started small instead of immediately going for direct stimulation. Harold began each session with non-genital touch. He traced the lines of his chest, explored the softness of his belly, and noticed the warmth of his thighs. He brought attention to his breath, to the texture of his skin, to how his body responded when there was no agenda. He used natural oils to enhance the sensory experience, letting each touch become an act of exploration rather than performance. What he discovered was profound by slowing down and expanding his definition of pleasure. Harold tapped into a new layer of intimacy with himself. He felt more alive, more present in his own skin. He noticed where his body held tension and allowed those areas to soften. He realized how his inner critic used to hijack the experience, rushing, judging, and pushing, and how gentleness brought more satisfaction than pressure ever could, but beyond physical sensation. This kind of intentional touch healed emotional wounds. Harold hadn't realized were still there, moments of shame from his youth, the loneliness of aging, the ache of grief from losing his partner. All of it found space to breathe. What started as a sensual practice became a spiritual one, allowing Harold to feel not only pleasure, but also forgiveness, self-acceptance, and even gratitude for his changing body. In this section, we'll offer a framework for rebuilding your relationship with touch. You'll learn about the 3 circles of touch, starting with neutral areas, moving to emotionally charged zones, and finally reapproaching erotic touch with softness and breath. We'll discuss techniques for expanding pleasure beyond the genitals, how to release shame stored in the body, and how to use touch as a form of emotional regulation and healing, because for many men, especially after 60, touch becomes something they give to others, but forget to give themselves. Harold discovered that restoring this balance opened doors to a richer, fuller life. And so, as Harold grew more in tune with his evolving relationship to pleasure, he noticed something powerful. The ripple effects extended far beyond the physical act itself. When he approached self-pleasure with mindfulness and care, it didn't just improve sensation, it stabilized his emotional state, improved his focus, and helped him feel more at peace in his everyday life. His interactions with family became more relaxed. His reactions to stress were calmer. Even his overall sense of identity as a man, as a person, still worthy of desire and presence, began to shift towards something stronger and more centered. This is no coincidence. Scientific research is clear. Sexual wellness and emotional well-being are deeply intertwined. When a man feels connected to his own body, he is more likely to experience balanced moods, decreased anxiety, and an improved sense of purpose. Masturbation, when practiced in moderation and with intention, becomes a form of emotional regulation. It releases not only oxytocin and dopamine hormones that ease stress and increase connection, but also reduces cortisol, the primary stress hormone that can wreak havoc on the immune system, sleep cycles, and emotional balance for Harold. This meant fewer emotional lows when he faced a hard week, grieving a friend, dealing with insomnia, or just feeling the weight of isolation. He knew how to ground himself. His self-care didn't begin with pills or quick distractions. It began with presence breath and the simple act of acknowledging his own needs. This act of turning inward wasn't indulgence. It was nourishment. It reminded him that he still mattered, even when the world felt quiet around him. This section explores how self-pleasure, especially when combined with practices like meditation music or guided breathing, can become a cornerstone of emotional health. We'll dive into how masturbation affects neurochemical balance, supports sleep, enhances mental clarity, and provides emotional release, particularly for men managing grief retirement transitions or long-term loneliness. You'll also learn how to set emotional intentions before touch, so your sessions move beyond sensation into emotional fulfillment, because aging doesn't diminish your emotional needs. In fact, it magnifies them, and with the right tools, you can meet them with confidence and care. Harold's journey came full circle, not with a big breakthrough or final solution, but with a quiet realization. His sexuality wasn't something to be hidden, feared, or viewed through the lens of decline. It was something to be reclaimed day by day as a part of his wholeness. For years, he'd thought that sexual energy was only about desire, performance, or intimacy with another, But now he understood it was also about self-respect, about honoring his body, his history, and his still vibrant capacity to feel joy as we age. Society often sends a subtle or not so subtle message that sexuality has an expiration date, that older adults should move on from that part of life, as if desire and sensuality were somehow inappropriate or irrelevant past a certain age. But this couldn't be further from the truth. Sexual identity evolves? Yes, but it doesn't disappear, and reclaiming that truth becomes an act of rebellion, of integrity, and of deep self-love. Harold began creating small rituals around his self-pleasure, lighting a candle, playing calming music, dressing in a soft robe, and treating the experience as something sacred rather than secretive. This wasn't about performance or fantasy, it was about presence. He stopped measuring the success of the moment by climax, and started measuring it by how connected he felt to himself. Afterward, that shift alone changed everything in this section. We'll show you how to create intentional practices that help you reclaim your sexuality, not as a leftover from youth, but as a powerful and present force. You'll learn how to shift your environment, mindset, and even language around masturbation so that it becomes a daily act of self-respect. We'll also explore how to talk about this transformation with others, friends, partners, or even your healthcare provider so that your sexuality becomes integrated rather than isolated. Because when you make peace with your changing body and claim your pleasure with confidence, you don't just heal your relationship with sex, you heal your relationship with yourself. You are not past your prime. You are becoming, and in this becoming, you are allowed to feel, to explore, to rediscover, whether with a partner or in the quiet of your own space. You have permission to experience pleasure, not as a relic of youth, but as a rite of maturity. If this video helped you feel seen, understood, or simply less alone, please drop the word presence in the comments below. Let others know they're not walking this path alone. Like the video to help more people find this conversation, and subscribe. If you want more honest, human, and healing insights about aging intimacy and well-being after 60, thank you for being here. Thank you for showing up for yourself. Until next time. Stay kind, stay present, and remember, you are still whole. You are still home.